Okay, so let's get right into it. How did a U.S. military operation in Latin America end up sparking this huge debate about a potential war in Asia? The big question we're really digging into is this. Did a raid in Venezuela accidentally give China the playbook for invading Taiwan?
You know, to really wrap our heads around this, we've got to go back to an event that, at first glance, has nothing to do with Taiwan. We're talking about a sudden military strike, like 9,000 miles away from Beijing. But the shockwaves, man, they hit China hard.
And this quote, this really says it all, doesn't it? This wasn't just a boast. No, this was a statement, a declaration of a new reality where the US basically said, yeah, we can do what we want when we want, especially in our own neighborhood.
All right, so what actually went down? Let's break down this operation, because it really did catch everyone off guard, especially Beijing.
So, picture this. January 3rd, U.S. Special Forces pull off this lightning-fast raid right in Caracas. They grab President Maduro and his wife and get them out of the country. And, get this, to make it all happen, they took down the entire power grid, just like that. It was incredibly fast, super effective, a real amazing military feat, to use the president's words.
Okay, so the raid happens in Venezuela, and the whole world is talking. But you want to know where the reaction was the fastest, and honestly, the most furious? Yeah, Beijing.
And listen to this. This wasn't your typical diplomatic, we disagree. Nope. This was a full-on accusation. For China, this wasn't just some targeted operation. They saw it as something way more dangerous, like the U.S. appointing itself the world's policeman. Judge, jury, and executioner, all rolled into one.
And this really shows you the two completely different universes these superpowers were living in. For the US, it was simple. We're getting rid of a bad guy and protecting our interests. But for Beijing, it was a unilateral, illegal, and bullying act that just spit on international law. It's like they weren't even watching the same movie.
But here's what's really fascinating, the timing. See, China's normally super cautious, right? They take their time, release some vague statement. Not this time. They came out swinging, condemning the raid within hours. That kind of speed, well, it tells you this didn't just annoy them. It hit a very, very raw nerve.
So you've got to be asking, why would China care so much about something happening in South America? Well, because this was never just about principles for them. This was about cold, hard, strategic interests.
Let's just start with one number, $60 billion. That's about how much money China has poured into Venezuela, making them the country's #1 creditor. So yeah, when the government you've backed with that much cash just gets removed, that's a $60 billion wake-up call. And honestly, it goes way beyond just the money. Think about it. Venezuela was crucial for China's energy supply. They're the biggest buyer of their oil. It was also Beijing's first big friend in South America, a huge symbol of their expanding global reach. And this one raid, it put all of that on the line, just like that.
But there was another shock, and this one was maybe a little humbling for Beijing. The Venezuelan military uses a lot of Chinese and Russian air defense systems, right? Well, they were totally useless, completely neutralized. U.S. helicopters flew around like they owned the place, without a single one getting shot down. For China, that had to be a terrifying look at just how far ahead of America's military tech really is.
So, this Venezuela raid sends this unmistakable message about American military dominance. And almost immediately, in Beijing's government buildings and all over Chinese social media, one huge question starts bubbling up. The logic seems so simple, almost seductive. If the U.S. can pull off a perfect decapitation strike in Venezuela, well, what's stopping Beijing from using that exact same playbook on Taiwan?
And this wasn't some fringe idea whispered in dark corners. No, it exploded on Chinese social media. You saw comments just like this one everywhere. The irony is just, wow. The idea was that the US had basically just given China a free masterclass on how to do a surprise attack. Suddenly, this idea of a quick, clean reunification with Taiwan seemed to some totally possible.
But hold on a second. When you really start to look at the details, comparing Venezuela to Taiwan is like comparing apples and, well, rocket launchers. Venezuela's military is weak. Taiwan's military, it's a powerhouse, armed to the teeth with U.S. tech. It's got powerful friends like Japan and South Korea right next door. And here's the biggest difference. Stopping Venezuela's oil hurts China. Stopping Taiwan's computer chips, that would absolutely cripple the entire global economy.
So the bottom line is this. The risks for China are just on another planet. Taiwan can fight back hard. The US and its allies would almost certainly jump in, and the economic damage would be a nightmare for everyone, China included. So that blueprint from Venezuela, yeah, it doesn't really apply here.
Okay, so maybe the raid wasn't a direct blueprint for invading Taiwan, but that doesn't mean China didn't learn something. In fact, it taught Beijing a huge lesson about how power really works today.
What it really did was serve as this brutal reminder that in geopolitics, at the end of the day, power talks and everything else walks. It showed that for all our talk about international law, brute force can still change the facts on the ground in the blink of an eye.
And if you want the bluntest takeaway, it's this. China can condemn the US at the UN all day long, but the real lesson they're probably learning is simple. Might makes right. In this great power game, the one with the biggest stick gets to write the rules.
So this whole thing probably doesn't make a Taiwan invasion more likely. What it does do is pour gasoline on the fire of China's military buildup. The new goal is crystal clear: build a military so powerful that no one, not even the United States, would ever dream of pulling a Venezuela on them. The lesson is simple. If you don't want to get pushed around, you have to be just as strong as the bully.
And that leaves us with the million-dollar question, doesn't it? This whole Venezuela affair, it wasn't really just about Venezuela. It was a sign of a much bigger shift in the world. As China gets stronger and challenges America's top spot, you have to wonder, in this new world with two superpowers, who gets to decide what's right, what's wrong, and who ultimately gets to write the rules?